titled Islam's Call for Justice in Gaza.
Mhm.
And these texts really lay out how ideas like standing against oppression and, importantly, the role of silence are framed within this particular viewpoint.
Right. And what's quite striking, I think, about these sources is how clear and unambiguous their stance is on these issues. So our aim here is really to unpack the depth of this religious and moral framework just as it's presented to us and try to grasp its direct implications.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this then. The source material kicks off by laying down a really core assertion. Islam commands its followers to stand firmly against injustice and oppression. So from the source's point of view, what makes this more than, say, just a suggestion? Why is it framed as such a fundamental directive?
Well, it's presented as something deeply, deeply ingrained in the faith itself, an obligation, really, that goes beyond personal preference or, convenience. This source really emphasizes that this isn't optional. It's portrayed as a cornerstone of living righteously, something demanding active participation in upholding what's right.
And to really underline this point, the source brings in a powerful verse from the Quran. It's from Surah Nisa, chapter 4, verse 135. It says, "O you who have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or parents and relatives."
Wow.
That specific part, even if it be against yourselves or parents and relatives, that really jumps out, doesn't it?
It does.
What does the source highlight about the significance of that particular demand?
Well, what's presented as truly profound here, according to the source, is how this elevates justice. It puts it above even the strongest human ties, family, parents, even yourself. It means essentially upholding truth and fairness, even when it's personally uncomfortable or even when it directly involves those closest to you. The source really underscores this as a huge challenge, but one that's absolutely central to the command for justice.
Okay, so building on that absolute commitment to justice, the source then seems to pivot. It moves towards how this translates into actual action rights, especially concerning the oppressed. How does it articulate that imperative?
Yeah, it introduces another really compelling Quran verse to make this point. Surah An-Nisa, again, chapter 4, verse 75. And this verse asks, essentially, "And what is wrong with you that you fight not in the cause of Allah and for the oppressed among men, women, and children who cry out, 'Our Lord, rescue us from this town whose people are oppressors.'"
And the source, it specifically draws attention to that phrase, the oppressed among men, women, and children, highlighting their acute vulnerability. It's not just a general call, it seems, but one pointing directly to those who are perhaps most helpless.
Precisely. And the source explicitly connects this verse to let's say, a broader message, a message about acting on behalf of the vulnerable. It frames this as a clear call for intervention, for actively working towards liberating those suffering under oppression. So it's about active engagement, definitely not passive observation, when you're faced with people in such dire need.
Right. So what does all this imply then for those who might just stay silent? When faced with situations like this, the source takes a very, very firm stance here. It goes as far as condemning silence in the face of oppression. How does it frame that, the sort of moral cost of inaction?
It's incredibly direct. The source states unequivocally, and I'm quoting here, "Those scholars and Muslims who remain silent about Gaza in the face of clear tyranny and suffering are not neutral, they are complicit." It argues that in these situations, silence isn't just a passive choice. It's actually seen as actively siding with the oppressor.
Wow, that's strong. And it doesn't pull any punches later either, asserting that silence in the face of oppression is not piety, it is betrayal. Betrayal, that's a powerful word. How does the source argue that silence constitutes betrayal? In what sense?
Well, if we connect this to the sort of the bigger picture presented, the source explicitly states that, quote, "Gaza is not a political issue. It is a moral and Islamic obligation." So it argues that this particular issue transcends, the usual political back and forth. Instead, it becomes a matter of core religious duty. And in that context, betrayal signifies breaking a fundamental moral or religious covenant, a promise, almost, because the Quran, as cited throughout these sources, calls followers to stand, to speak, and to act for the sake of justice. So the implication is clear. In action, silence is a direct contradiction of these core commands. And this whole framing, it really encourages you, the listener, to consider the profound implications here. Viewing an issue not just politically, but through this lens of explicit moral and religious obligation, as this source presents it, it really shifts the whole nature of responsibility, doesn't it? Both individual and collective.
Yeah, it really does. So just to quickly summarize what we've covered in this deep dive today, we've seen how the provided source material outlines, first, a foundational command to stand firmly for justice, then a direct call to action specifically for the oppressed, and finally, a very specific, very strong condemnation of silence, which is framed as complicity and even betrayal within this particular Islamic framework.
And this, I think, raises a really important question for reflection. How does this strong religious command, as it's laid out in the source, this command to act for justice and actively speak out against oppression,